Six Nation, Alicia Bush. Take one.
Hold for sound.
Stand by.
Okay. Alicia, our conversation today is about the mindset of a victim and emotional bonds and trauma, psychological abuse. So if you could speak first about, I think a big question is, why don't victims just leave their traffickers when oftentimes they're not physically chained to a bedpost? Talk about the emotional bonds there and how strong those can be.
So when I think of the young ladies that have come to our program, their victimizers are oftentimes parents or a caregiver that really has provided them food, shelter, clothing. They actually may feel safe when they're with them. Outside of the exploitation, outside of the abuse, they look at them as a trusted friend, as a boyfriend, as something that they've been missing their whole life. So say mom and dad are still married, and mom is involved in the country club, and dad travels a lot, and they're just looking for somebody to say, I matter, or do you see me? And they meet someone online. They begin communicating, they begin a friendship, a relationship, and the grooming process can take months, it can take years, it can even just take a few days. But by the time that they've connected with this individual, they feel that they can trust them. So when people say, we're gonna rescue someone, they don't feel like they need to be rescued because they feel like they're right where they're supposed to be, even outside of the abuse and the exploitation.
Real quick, great answer. The mic, yeah. Just for safety, Alicia, you hit on all the points I was looking for. Thank you.
Awesome.
I need you to take that again.
Okay.
The mic unfortunately points it a little far.
Okay.
Well, it should be okay. This mic's so hot.
Yeah, oh yeah, and that mic's gonna be good.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn it into something. Alicia, just expound on that for me a little bit. Let's talk
Okay.
about, like just to continue a little more on those bonds, the trauma bonds.
Okay. So for me, I think the dangers of us as a society saying it's a boogeyman, it's a scary human out there that's keeping these individuals chained to a bed or locked up. In reality, the scariest part is the manipulation, the connection that the trafficker, that the perpetrator feels that they have to its victim. There is, some call it Stockholm Syndrome, but really if we can really think of that connection that they have, makes it very difficult for someone to want to run away or to not please the person that is providing them safety, shelter, food, clothing, acceptance, love. So that trauma bond is very hard to break, and it really takes a long time, as you can imagine, unraveling and unpeeling all the things that they have been taught for so long, that journey to healing can take decades.
Right, that's wonderful. And on that, if you could explain the process of deconstructing those years of trauma from trafficking.
Yeah, so let's now go to, she's with you,
Mm-hmm.
and the process starts. Whatever you want to share about that, because I really do think that this part of the fight is underexposed, and the difficulty, the burnout rate, just how difficult is it if someone's programmed a human being to deprogram and to restore? It's the toughest part of the job. Way harder even than the rescues part.
Right.
If we can dive into that, please.
Yeah, so when someone comes into our program, that part even alone is the hardest part, right? Because they've already been living with someone that they've realized that may be unsafe, that it may not be the best situation. So, hey, why don't you come and live with us? You should trust us. We're gonna care for you, and we're gonna do all the right things for you. And they're looking at us going, but should I? Haven't I already been in a situation where I ended up not being cared for? So when they come in, one of the first books that we have them read is Safe People. And people think, well, I know who's safe, but really, do you know who's safe? Do you know if you are safe or not? What are you? What's the litmus test for someone that is safe? And to know this person is safe, this person isn't safe, and then once I realize that this person is unsafe, what do I do? What are my next steps? So that's one of the first things that we have them read. But the very slow process of sleeping, some of us will oftentimes have to sit next to a resident throughout the whole night for weeks because this person cannot sleep throughout the night. They wake up having night terrors. They're triggered when the mailman comes and to deliver mail. They want to know who is that. When a volunteer wants to come in, this rewiring of telling them, okay, now you're saying that this person that hurt me isn't safe, but how do I know who is around me that's even safe? How do I know what to share, what not to share? Going to the bathroom in the middle of the night can be scary. And especially if your roommate is not screaming throughout the night and having night terrors, but you are. How do you adapt in community as you're beginning to recover? And then you're going to a therapist that's in our program, that is a safe person, but now what do you want me to say? How am I supposed to behave? I've been told what to say and how to behave and how to comply. Compliance is such, when they come into the program, they're just like, oh my goodness, yes, I will do everything that you say to do. I won't have a cell phone. I won't be on social media. And you just go, that's the way it should be, right? But in reality, we're actually trying to teach them how to use their voice, how to stand up for themselves, how to take back ownership of their lives. And when they're all used to complying and doing and following the rules and doing exactly what they've been told to do. We had one young lady who wouldn't come out of her room at 6 a.m. She was awake, she wanted a drink of water, but she thought she had to ask permission. And so the other girls didn't start getting around and getting to breakfast until 8. So she sat in her room, positioned on her bed, and waited for permission to come out of her room. And we were heartbroken because all she needed was a cup of water. But she just thought, this is how the rules are. I need to follow the rules because I don't want to get kicked out, because getting kicked out means that I will lose my life. Is that what you wanted?
Yeah. Do you have anything?
No, let's keep going.
Just one more. You've hit on a lot of these, but if you could speak from the standpoint of somebody in the facility on staff, some of the greatest challenges that safe houses face, and if you could speak to treating an adult versus treating minor.
So for us treating adults, so many of our biological adults are really emotionally minors, that we find ourselves reparenting 18, 19, 28-year-olds. And so for the team, it's so hard because, especially when we had, say, COVID going on, the world is on fire, everybody's at home, everybody's dealing, and then you've got to show up and be present in this home and tell these individuals that they're safe, that they're going to be okay, that the world isn't falling apart. And even though you've got people around you that are feeling their own trauma, coming in and being fully present can be exhausting for the team. Burnout rates are just extraordinarily high. You take all the training, all the self-care, everything that you could provide a team member, and then you just see the look on their face of just, this is so hard to continue to hear the trauma over and over and over. Some of our young ladies were sitting around a dining room table just recently that had been donated by a community member, and just sharing how important a meal was. And so, of course, the team member was like, what do you mean by that? Can you tell me a little bit more? Well, I've never actually sat around a table without drugs and guns. And just to hear that and just think about how oftentimes we take those things for granted, and knowing the impact that we're having on that individual, that we're sharing a meal for the first time in their whole life. And then another young lady, she chimed in and said, well, I've never actually had my own bed. You're almost 30 years old. What do you mean you've never had your own bed to sleep in a safe place where you weren't crowd surfing, that you weren't being forced to do things that that you didn't want to do, or that you didn't know that you had to do just to even survive. So for the staff to come in, I mean, we say it's usually a 1-to-4 ratio, one team member to every 4 residents, but oftentimes, depending on their needs, we'll have 2 to 4, sometimes 3 to 4, and whether that's running around to doctor's appointments, or if that's simply just sitting with an individual as they cry about their cat that they had to leave with a friend to come into this program that died, that was really a support for them for 10 years, and walking them through that, walking them through grief of losing a loved one while they're in our program. Not to mention all the unpacking that comes with just the trauma alone.
Alicia, can you, as you're able, I want to get into a little bit of the, giving people a bit of a view inside the life of a safe house, drop-in center, a shelter.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk to some of the training that goes into the staff? Okay?
Yeah.
Because I want people to understand the investment.
Yeah.
And then when there's burnout and someone leaves, it's like losing a Navy SEAL. You just put $2 million into this guy and
Yeah.
he's gone. And you don't just start over and replace this person tomorrow.
Yeah.
So just looking at Rebecca, the process of training the staff, because so many people, I want to volunteer, I want to help, I want to talk to victims. You can't just walk off the street and come talk to survivors. So yeah.
Yeah. So the training piece has become more and more critical as we've gone along. You know, we talk about trust-based TBRI. We talk about trust-based relationship training and in the house, and how and we're trauma informed, but it goes so much more beyond that mental health of de-escalation. When someone gets ramped up and they get big, we have to teach the team how to not also get big, how this isn't personal at all. This is never personal. It's always about the trauma. The behavior is the trauma. And we just look at these individuals, and for a long time it was, oh, well, they're acting out. But really looking at the mental health and understanding this behavior is coming out and they're being triggered by this. So we're always stepping back 2 steps every time we look at a behavior and say, okay, let's assess. Why is this person responding this way? Or why are they not showering every day? What is Elizabeth, our therapist in the home, what is she talking to them about that could be potentially causing this eating disorder to flare back up? We had one individual that came in that didn't disclose that she had an eating disorder. So jump into training. We have dissociative identity disorder, which that's a fractioning of the brain to really protect them. So this multiple personalities, we have individuals, 1/3 of our residents have experienced satanic ritual abuse. So these levels of high needs residents also need high needs and high levels of training continually. It can't just be once, it has to be constant. They're in training right now called Handle with Care. That's a training to really understand when an individual, how do we de-escalate, but also how do we properly do restraints according to the law, what's permissible when it comes to adults versus minors. And the level of individuals when they come in and we say, here's the expectation. We need activities of daily living. We need everything that they're doing to be logged. Why is that, Alicia? Well, this person has a tendency to not shower when they're feeling levels of trauma or suicidal. Okay, so when they're feeling suicidal, we need to understand how many room checks are oftentimes needs to be done. How many eyes on this individual? How long should we let them be alone on their own before they're self-harming? Before we now have an intense crisis on hand, and now we have to take an individual to the hospital. So there's those of us that have safe houses, there's those of us that are in mental health, and we're kind of in the middle, a hybrid in between, because how do we help individuals in a mental hospital for long term, and how do we help individuals if we're just providing a safe house that has Jesus and a GED? What about that middle ground of supporting them in that mental health need? Because if I'm sleeping through the night, if I'm not sleeping through the night, I'm not going to show up to work very well. I'm really not going to keep that job if I don't have proper coping skills. And all of this is centered around the sustainability in their mental health. Are they properly set up to win when they leave their program, or are they just going to go right back out, make a mistake, and shame spiral, and then where do they have an opportunity to go then?
Alicia, can you talk any particular story that paints the picture that this is not what people think? Meaning, white van, snatch a kid, off they go, someone's tied to a pole, someone, break the stigma of a story of what people would just go, did not expect that, or that survivor coming from that environment. And I think it's important to hear it from the inside of a safe house director that, yeah, this is what we see.
So no one in our home that we've cared for has been abducted. All of our individuals have gone willingly to their trafficker, and people go, oh my goodness, well then that must mean it was their fault. But really, let's rewind all the way back, even before they met their trafficker, when they were sexually abused at a preschool at age 4. And then so now their idea of what it is to be a 4-year-old has changed. And then they're in an environment where they now have older siblings, and they may be exposed to pornography at also a very young age. And so now all these thoughts begin to unravel around sexuality and promiscuity, and maybe they don't even feel that. I've even met a young lady who said, I learned how to give oral sex at age 3 so I could begin performing at age 4. And she said, I thought everybody else at school was doing that too. While the other kids are riding their bikes, I was providing oral sex for our neighbors. And she had no idea that that was not normal, that was not something that she should have been doing. So then continue this for years and years. Now she's shamed at school. Now people call her names. Now girls are told not to hang out with her, and boys are told that they can't be boyfriend and girlfriend with her because of her behaviors. And then she meets a charming young man at a football game, and they begin to have a connection and build a relationship, and the next thing you know, she's pregnant and 14, and she's sleeping on a sofa, and he's saying, hey, you're gonna have to help me pay for this baby. You're gonna have to help me pay for these bills. She's like, well, I'm only 14, how can I do that? And then he says, well, I can teach you how to do that. We can take photos for the landlord. We can go to a strip club, and you could just meet people. You don't have to do anything, and it's just this slow progression. It doesn't have to be, let me pump you full of drugs and put you out there, because you know what? At the end of the day, these individuals are businessmen and businesswomen that are trafficking these individuals. So they see these people as not people, but more as products to be sold. So they want to have a good product to be sold. So someone pushed out on the streets, chained up, pumped full of drugs, isn't a good product. If I can put you on an airplane, send you to the Super Bowl or a convention where large groups of men gather, you go and you make me money and you bring it home, that is a much more viable product to sell if you can just go out there willingly and then come back. And then at the end of the day, you go, is it willingly? What set them up? What was the trajectory of their life? Started at very early age to where they find themselves in this position that they really feel that they can't get out of, and quite honestly, they feel that they deserved it.
See? God, by the word of their testimony, thank you, Alicia. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Because it comes through real stories. Can you speak briefly just about, because I want to separate, a safe house is not a safe house, and a shelter is not a shelter, and the program is not a program. I mean, it's really about the people. So for TVF, what is the culture, and what is the motto and the focus for you guys?
Well, one of the things that we're working on right now is continuing to rebuild, refine, really hone in on what our culture is, as we've learned that we approach this from a culture of honor. We not only honor the young ladies that we serve and their journey, but honoring each other in how we communicate with each other in and outside the home. We have an open culture that we really need to be really open and authentic with each other about what's going on, because the girls can tell. The girls, when there's not harmony and there is division and disunion going on amongst the staff, they can tell. Just like when a staff member leaves, and say the staff member leaves on good terms, it's still a loss for the residents, because that was an attachment that they had, a bond, a good healthy bond. And when someone leaves and goes to, goes back to school or for whatever reason, that change is hard. So even amongst our staff, knowing that we gotta trust each other, we have to feel safe. And one of the books that we're reading is written by a Navy SEAL, and he really talks about how important the team is, and the culture and the trust and the ownership, that we all own the mission, that we look at each other as an owner, and that when we serve our residents knowing that everything that we are connected, that no one says, well, that's not my lane, that it has to all be our lane. We all have to, because this is, at the end of the day, it's about the health of the residents, but they can only be healthy if we are healthy as an organization.
Yes. You want, and I have one more, yeah. Can I just, is your tied to what you just said?
In a way, but probably.
Okay, but don't lose your question.
Oh.
Right, you won't?
Oh, you're okay.
Don't lose it, okay,
Promise.
because mine is absolutely tight.
You're good.
Alicia, bold question, don't have to answer it, but good, bad, indifferent, what kind of stress has this put on your role as a wife and a mother? I mean, how does this affect the staff's personal lives?
He would answer that. He would ask that today. As a wife, that trying to find a balance, if there is one at all, when I go home and I know that laying my head down on my pillow next to my husband is safe, and knowing that the ones that we serve may have never felt that and may never feel that, quite honestly. The reality of what's going on around us and what's going outside the four walls of my home, and trying not to bring that burden, that heartbreak, that heaviness home, there's such a tension there that oftentimes I feel that I don't do well, that I don't hold it together well, that I have cried myself to sleep I don't know how many times, and looked at my husband and said, what are we doing? What is it all for? And to have a husband also that can be, has always been so supportive, and understands in the spirit that what we're doing is kingdom and is exactly where we're supposed to be. But in the flesh, it's, Alicia, you're volunteering your time away from our family to go and help those in need, but we need you here. And to know that in the back of my head of, am I doing as well as I am in the safe house, in the program, and in the community, as well as I am at home, and vice versa. And that's a hard thing to wrestle with. When I look at my kids and say, this is how we're going to be safe on the internet. This is how we're going to have cell phones or not have cell phones. And this is how we're going to behave. And they look at me like I'm crazy. But it's because of what I know and what I've seen. And I never want to operate out of fear, but the knowledge of teaching my kids, but then also wanting to share it with the world, wanting to say, parents, don't let your kids do that. Moms, come on now. Fathers, where are you in this fight? And that tension of trying to save the world and not lose my soul is very real. And then to even add that to the team and caring for the team well, and knowing that the team also has lives outside of what's going on at our job, but they're oftentimes intertwined, and trying to provide appropriate support for individuals that have lost a family member to death or are sick, and trying to fill in all those voids, while all the while trying to keep our residents in this perfect, safe bubble, while the things around them may be really hard. Yeah, all of those things are real.
Thank you, Alicia. My question is about trust. I'm hearing a lot about trust and how grueling it is to repair the trust once survivors are in the safe home. They're in a safe place. So I'm not sure what your answer will be on this, but I've heard from other people in this line of work that truly anybody can be exploited. Truly anybody
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
a vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because trust is so universal. We all want to trust somebody.
Sure.
So can you speak to just what happens emotionally and psychologically when, as you said, for months, somebody is groomed, somebody really thinks they're building a relationship like no other, and then that is just, the curtain is pulled back, and now they've become a product?
One of the things I find that they don't know if they even can trust themselves. Do I even now know how to make safe choices? Do I know how to be in a relationship that's healthy? And then, what is healthy? And I think that breaking the trust with others is one part of it, but breaking the trust within themselves, of the shame of how could I be so stupid? How could, and that record that continues to play. I feel so dirty now. This is my fault. And the trafficker did a great job, did a masterful job of making sure that they knew that they owned those choices. And so now how can they ever even trust themselves? So I think first, that is really the most important thing that we have to do, is reinstill with them how to have confidence once again in their own choices, and showing them how to do that, and come alongside and not shame them when they make a poor choice, but show them the better choice. Show them the way that to keep them safe, that they're not always going to be in a safe house. But how do we walk that out, and how do we model it as a team by our unity, by how we connect with community members and volunteers? And even when my spouse comes into the home, they're watching. They're watching us and how we conduct our lives, and how we speak to one another, how we share things on social media, how we share things, our political views, and how we are to honor. And that builds that just innate piece of us that says, you know what, that is a trustworthy behavior that I too want to emulate, that I too want to have inside of me.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
I think in closing, anything that's on your heart about anything relating to the work you do, we do, in like a 2-minute close, that you want to share.
Oh, gosh. I think so much of what you all talk about is how did this happen? How did we get here? And going all the way back to how God created us to be as a family, how we are to honor each other, how we are to operate out of respect and dignity. That was something so critical, just looking at our residents and just seeing the lack of dignity that they feel, and going, who did that to you? And then looking, it wasn't oftentimes one person, because that one person also had a father, had a mother, had a teacher, had a coach, had people influencing them, which is inevitably influenced how they behaved and how they treated this survivor. So when people say, oh my goodness, we want to focus so much on the victim, or we want to focus so much on the trafficker, but there has to be an understanding that there would not be a supply if there was no demand. So when people say, how are you going to stop this? Well, I can't stop them on the end of it in a safe house. We have to go back to scratching our heads and going, how are we raising up our sons? How are we raising up our daughters? Because we are more likely to be contributors. Our sons and daughters are more likely to be contributors to this issue than they are victims. That's a hard reality to know, that if I am not part of the solution in changing the way that I do things and how I'm raising my kids and how I speak over my husband and what I allow in my life, that I will be a contributor to this issue. I will be a part of the problem if I do not see that I can be a part of the solution.